Hi, I'm Vadd, and this is a moment in time that I want to capture. There's been a number of big announcements that I think are going to be looked back on as a moment in history, a moment in time that I want to capture here in this video. This isn't a news video. It's not an update video. I'm not here telling you the sky is falling, everything's going to burn. We're not here to gripe and complain, woe is me. I just see a number of decisions being made that I think we're going to look back on and kind of want to remember this moment. And the short of it is that Sony, the company Sony, is making considerably more profit from PlayStation while its hardware sales and playtime goes down. And for some reason, it's looking at this and it's saying, hey, here's the solution. Let's lower our distribution costs. Let's try and turn up stronger digital revenue. And let's get tighter studio management. In one sentence, Sony is making more money while giving players less choice. And I think the real danger here is that Sony is removing the advantage of console ownership, while at the same time, they're giving players more reason to continue to move to PC. I think Sony is squeezing itself between two very strong identities. You have PC gaming, which has the largest library of games. You have the most hardware choices. You have the most competitive stores out there competing. And you have just broad functionality of PC you game on can do other things. That's identity one that Sony's starting to squeeze itself between. And identity two is Nintendo. Nintendo has distinct hardware and games that remain unavailable elsewhere. And part of that's because I think of Nintendo like a toy company that makes games, not a gaming company that happens to have toys. That's a different conversation for a different. I think Sony's taking all the wrong lessons from current marketing conditions. I think they're looking at their competitors and they're broadly failing to understand the position they are currently in and the direction they're moving towards. Sony announced that beginning January 2028, all newly released PlayStation games will no longer receive physical discs. I don't think that millions of people are just going to abandon PlayStation. The numbers are clear. Digital purchases were approximately 80% of all purchases across PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 for Sony's 2025 fiscal year. That means for 12 months, 4 out of 5 purchases were digital, not physical. So Sony can sit there and say, look, the sales data is clear. Obviously, most people prefer digital, 4 out of 5 purchases. I think something not being said in that statement is that just because consumer preference for one option exists does not mean that those same consumers want the other option prohibited. Even players who are currently buying digital may dislike having that choice removed to buy a physical disc. Notice, I think this announcement is especially damaging because Sony is not just saying its own first-party releases are digital only. It's saying there will be no physical production for all new games released on PlayStation. If a game is coming to PlayStation as of January 2028, according to these announcements, there will be no physical disc, no matter who made the game. I think the player group this hurts the most are the budget-conscious players, right? Not the enthusiast collectors. These are the loudest of critics. I'm talking about families and patient buyers. They're the ones who are going to feel these financial effects. Think about it. You buy a physical game, let's just say it's $100. You spend $100 on a physical game, but later you resell it for $50. The effective cost for you was $50. There's a reason that a used copy of a video game gives younger players and more budget-conscious households a very important, cheaper entry point. I understand Sony can sit there and go, but look, digital sales are excellent. Right, but now there's no independent used seller applying that downward pressure to the price. I think this is a continued push that is going to drive this industry towards a luxury product, which I think will doom the whole thing. I think there should be fun video games for everyone. And the more difficult you make it to get into your system, to buy fun games, to have great experiences, the more expensive it becomes, the less people choose to do that. See, something not being discussed in this is that Sony's gaming revenue was basically flat year over year. This past fiscal year, just year over year, okay, 1-to-1. But their operating profit rose 37%. I want to be very clear here. Sony says the main reason for that because they were refunded US tariffs. This gave them a, quote, favorable currency movement. But I think all these numbers hide a deeper truth. Hardware revenue fell because Sony sold fewer consoles. Revenue from all third-party games collectively declined, but because they got, I think it's 81.7 billion yen added back into their budget, it's hiding those declines from showing up as the substantial drop they actually are. In short, the core sales of PlayStation were at best stagnant, but really quite a bit weaker. There were some temporary financial benefits that caused a reported profit jump. I get it, 37% profit up looks impressive. And then you take those numbers and go, hey, look, profits are up 37%, 4 out of 5 sales were digital. Why are we dealing with the hassle and the supply chain and the expense of these physical copies? Get rid of them. And I don't think Sony is doing this in a vacuum. I think Microsoft and Nintendo are looking at Sony's moves and judging from a distance. Because if Sony revenue remains healthy 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road, I think the industry is going to take that lesson. Physical buyers might be passionate, but they're commercially expendable. Facts are, I think Sony's digital ratio, 4 to 5, suggests the company believes the financial benefits outweigh losing 1/5 of their customer base. Like I said at the beginning of this, I really do think that Sony is positioning itself very, very bad way. It's going to get squeezed between the PC market and Nintendo specifically, because Sony is saying, hey, we are less flexible than a PC, and we're also less unique than Nintendo. It is actively removing any advantage of console ownership while giving all the players more reasons to move PC. Again, I don't think Sony will suffer any catastrophic short-term financial penalty. It's not going to happen. I think there will be a loud minority of customers that will be very upset and complain and continue buying the games they want them. Because I think the damage here long-term is much more subtle. PlayStation is becoming a more closed, expensive, and temporary feeling ecosystem. I get it. Sony gets better margins, less manufacturing risk, more control over sales. Their customers are losing resale value, independent price competition, lending, collecting, and a meaningful form of long-term ownership. I'm not saying physical games are dying. I'm saying that Sony is removing the last major form of consumer leverage from console game purchases. I think one of the fallouts from this, again, subtle things, Nintendo now possesses an increasingly valuable point of differentiation here. They're continuing to offer tangible releases. I know there's imperfect formats with keycards. I know it's not all perfect, but the facts are Sony's saying only digital. This is your only option, and that makes people who have any physical property stand out. I think what we'll see is a digital-only standard console. I think they might sell an optional external drive for older games. I think we'll see a more expensive model containing a drive just for backwards compatibility. Maybe they try and sell movies on the side, but I think that's kind of a shot in the dark because it's a gamble. Why would you produce a standard disc-equipped console when no games moving forward offer it? Why would you sell something at an increased price point that people aren't going to be able to functionally use? And I know people want to talk about preservation, but again, the facts are that a disc is not a perfect preservation tool, but a disc still provides a physical, transferable copy and enough data to install and play an original build. Moving the digital-only games, you're suddenly dependent on more than just that disc. You're dependent on store availability, authentication systems, account access, Sony continuing to host the files, publishers maintaining the required servers. The facts are this change makes preservation substantially worse. Again, Sony is removing the advantages of console ownership while giving players more reason to move the PC. I think there's a casual market of customers that may still choose a PlayStation because they think it's convenient. But you can look at Valve's Steam machine or some other very, very convenient entry points to the PC market. I think pre-built PCs have never been in a better place. It used to be it was kind of daunting to try and get into PC gaming. It's no longer any more difficult than getting your console set up. The difference is a PC offers a vastly larger library spanning decades of games. Sony doesn't exist in a vacuum. Their games aren't the best in show. They aren't the only games people are going to want to play. Yes, Sony has a PC marketplace, just like all the other big game companies, just like third-party retailers like Good Old Games, Steam, the Epic Games Store. the Microsoft Store, the EA app, the Ubisoft Connect, the Battlefront, the BattleNet. Facts are, every publisher has their own specific launcher, plenty of competition on PC. There's this massive library of games going back decades, tens and tens of years, 20s, 30s, 40 years ago. PlayStation's console does not have that library. It will never have that library. It can't compete with that breadth, no matter how many exclusives they try and push out. PC will always have multiple competing storefronts. It'll also have backwards compatibility and upgradable hardware. And PC gaming allows you direct access to handheld options. Example, like the Steam Deck. The only thing PlayStation can really offer moving forward is early access to Sony games. Maybe there's a group of players that have an existing PlayStation library they're hoping will get ported to future console generations. Maybe there's trophies or friend groups. Seems like a bit of a gamble because you're sitting there saying, hey, we're going to have fewer games. There will be no resale market. It'll be fixed hardware. There will be no mod support. You're stuck with one controller storefront. We're not promising any backwards compatibility. Why would you buy into that ecosystem? And you can say to me, well, you buy PlayStations to buy PlayStation games. But you and I both know that Sony does not have enough exclusive output over the last few years to make that make any sense. Even if Sony expects to have one major tentpole game per year, that is not enough to maintain an ecosystem. Sony's going to have to make a bunch of serious changes to their current business model. They're going to have more frequent first-party releases. They're going to have significantly longer and more clear exclusivity windows. Right now, all the Sony games come to PC eventually. It might take 24 months, but it doesn't matter because most PC gamers on a long enough timeline have a backlog of 10 out of 10 games they will absolutely love. Sony is competing with all those games. They're going to be forced to not only force out longer, more clear exclusivity windows, but they're also going to have to make their console cheaper. If Sony thinks they're going to release a premium price console and stay competitive, they will fail. They're going to have to start offering features on their console that PCs cannot easily duplicate. I don't know what that looks like, but they have to differentiate somehow. They're going to have to offer better backwards compatibility, and that's probably a very, very expensive task to overhaul. On top of that, I think this forces Sony to start competing with a compelling handheld or some kind of a hybrid element. They have to do something to create a meaningful, improved living room experience. They don't currently offer any of that. They have very few first-party releases. They have very short exclusivity windows. They are not cheaper than PC. All their current features PC can do. They have very minimal backwards compatibility. They have no handheld. And the living room experience is not better than Nintendo, PC, Microsoft. They offer nothing. I take it back. No, they do offer something. A PlayStation is basically a restricted gaming PC with fewer games and a mandatory Sony-only storefront. I got it. Sony wants to lean on brand familiarity. They're trying to really push a few must-play games. And they're hoping they can get people in their ecosystem and trap them there. But that's not going to be enough. They're going to have to figure out how to extract more cash per individual player to keep this closed loop functioning. That means you should expect more in-game predatory monetization from Sony first titles. That means you should expect subscription models for all your games. Some kind of battle pass that will give you tangible in-game bonuses. I think on paper, it's easy to understand the justification here. If you're a company, why would you not reduce your manufacturing and distribution cost? Why wouldn't you keep purchases inside your store? Why don't you get rid of the competition of used games? Why don't you stop customers from reselling older games? Make every game buyer a continuing account holder. Do something to strengthen your grasp on your customer. You're going to try and strengthen Sony's control over their price and their access. But they're no longer more convenient than a PC, Nintendo, than an Xbox. They're not offering more games. They're not offering better prices. They're not offering better features. PlayStation's offering less freedom and a smaller library of games. It's just risking everything that maybe they can sell a cheaper, simpler box as Sony continues to push towards removing the last major form of all consumer leverage for console game purchases. The question every consumer is going to be forced to ask is, why would I buy a Sony device when PC exists? Why would I buy a Sony device when Nintendo exists? Especially if the console is no longer cheaper or a more simple entry point to today's gaming PCs. And if the only answer is that exclusives are going to save the business, yikes.